If you would, let's go to 1 Kings, 1 Kings chapter 11. 1 Kings chapter 11. Did any of you see any sleet or anything today? A little snow spitting out. That's that is Indiana weather there. 70 degrees yesterday, tornado, little snow today. Just that's the way it happens. So, 1 Kings chapter 11, and we're going to look at the last verse here. We've been working our way through the Bible over the last few weeks, and we looked at some of the names of God in the first 5 or 6 books of the Bible. We looked at some of the names of the false gods that Israel was bumping up against. It was all over the land, and God warned them again and again not to take in these false gods into their life. And he tells them to beware of that again and again. And they would get to where they were doing very well in the book of Judges, and then they would walk away from God. They would forsake the Lord, and they would embrace these false gods, and God would send oppression, chastisement to wake them up. In that oppression, they would cry out to God, and God would send a deliverer, somebody to help them. And so we looked through the book of Judges. We looked at the judges in the book, and how God sent these people, different ones, different kinds of people, through the book of Judges. And then we looked at the life of Samuel. Samuel's introduced in the first chapter of 1 Samuel, and the Jewish people would have received the book of Samuel as one book. Same with Kings and also with Chronicles. And so in the first chapter, we're introduced to Samuel. His mother couldn't have a child. She goes to the house of God and asks for a child of the Lord, and God gives her a child, this baby, Samuel. And she told the Lord, if you give me a baby, I'll lend him back to you. I'll consider him, lent to me, and so I'll give him back to you. And so we looked at the life of Samuel, and Samuel was quite a heroic guy. And I love the way the Lord speaks to him as a little boy, probably about 12 years old. And Eli, even though Eli was not the man that he should have been, he teaches Samuel to address the Lord, to speak. And thy servant is listening. And God begins to speak to Samuel. So Samuel has quite a life. And so we've been doing these things where we're looking at the beginning of the life and the end of life, kind of like the whole arc. And that's one of the great things about Bible. The Bible is that God oftentimes, not every time, but oftentimes God gives us the beginning, the middle, and the end of a life. Some people begin very well and end poorly. Some people don't start so hot, but they end on the up note. And it's better to end well than to begin well. So you may have started in a bad way. Catch up. Start well if you can, but by all means, finish well. And so Samuel is greatly used of the Lord. Samuel anoints 2 kings. He anoints Saul, and he anoints David when Saul has been rejected. And so we moved past Samuel, and we looked at the life of Saul. Saul was the first king of Israel, and we kind of see the overarching thing of his life, that he begins well and he ends very poorly. He dies on the battlefield with 3 of his sons. It's a horrible day there in Israel. There's times that he is very disobedient to the Lord. He embraces jealousy, and he's raging against his son-in-law David, and multiple times he tries to kill David. And so David is on the run for years, literally for his life, and there's at least 2 occasions where David could have killed Saul, and he didn't. And when Saul is killed, if anybody could have rejoiced, David could have. Thank God he's out of the way now. But that's not the way he does that. In 2 Kings chapter 1, or 2 Samuel chapter 1, he grieves, not just for Jonathan. Jonathan is his brother-in-law, but also a very dear friend. He grieves for Jonathan, but he also grieves for Saul. And so he really takes that to heart, that touch not mine anointed. And so we saw the beginning and end of Saul's life. We looked at David's life. David, I mean, I don't know how you not like David. David is to me, a very likable character in Scripture, and just an incredible life, a very humble man at many times, very much used of the Lord, and it's March Madness, and somebody will talk about a David and Goliath matchup on the court, echoing back to something happened over 3,500 years ago about how David battled Goliath and God brought a victory there. He becomes the king. He's anointed three times. Three times. When he's anointed as a boy, and while Saul's still the king, he's anointed at Hebron, where he's the king for 7.5 years. And then he's anointed over all of Israel, where he reigns as the king for 33 more years. So 40 years altogether as the king of Israel. He knows some failure. His great failure is his sin with Bathsheba, the murder of her husband, the cover-up of all that. And we see people fail epically. We see people do things even inside of a church. And I try to remember this oftentimes, that the way the world views this, not only is it a crime what happens as far as the first initial sin, but the way the world looks at it, the cover-up is almost as bad. And David's cover-up is truly of epic awfulness. And so adultery, murder of Uriah, cover-up. We talked about the story of Nathan that comes in. It talks about the little lamb, and David's enraged about the death of the little lamb, and Nathan says this very poignant, "Thou art the man." And so David hands his son Solomon the kingdom, basically. We looked last week at Solomon, the king. So there's three kings that we looked at: Saul and David and Solomon. And Solomon is passing away here. Look in verse number 43 of chapter 11, 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 43. Well, let's go back. Let's read verse 41 down. It says, "And the rest of the acts of Solomon and all that he did and his wisdom, are they not written in the book of the acts of Solomon? In the time that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over Israel was 40 years. So it would seem that Saul reigned 40, David reigned 40, and Solomon reigned 40. And it says, "And Solomon slept with his fathers, and was buried in the city of David his father, and Rehoboam his son reigned in his stead." And so it sounds like it's going to all pass to Rehoboam. So if you didn't know the rest of the story, you think, well, Rehoboam takes over and everything's just good and moving along fine. But that's not the way it goes. The message tonight is about a split kingdom. Things kind of fall apart. After the death of King Solomon, the kingdom separates, and there's a northern kingdom, which is called Israel, and that is led by a man by the name of Jeroboam. Now, he's the first Jeroboam. There's another Jeroboam that comes along in the line, and he's going to lead Israel that has 10 of the tribes of Israel. The southern kingdom, which is called Judah in Scripture, is led by Rehoboam, which is the son of Solomon, and this consists of 2 tribes. So there's 12 tribes, 10 in the north, 2 in the south, and they're made up of Judah and Benjamin. And so you say, why, after all these years, about 120 years or so, that they're officially a kingdom and they have 3 kings, why does it come to a place where the thing splits now? Now, if you know your American history, our country at one point was, people were trying to split the country, the Great Civil War, if you're on the southern side, it's the Great War of Northern Aggression, however you look at all those things, and the country was splitting, and it was brought back together. And so this didn't come back together quite the way it did for our country. And one of the great causes of the split was Solomon was a heavy taxer, heavily demanding money, and he forced labor on the people. Look back just a few pages to 1 Kings chapter 7. What was it that Solomon built that took some length of time to build? Does anybody remember that? The temple. He built the temple. And so there's this going on. Actually, did I say 7? Chapter 6, verse number 37. And his reign, his kingdom was marked by these huge building projects, grand building projects. The first one would be the temple that we think of. And so in 1 Kings 6, verse 37, it says, in the 4th year was the foundation of the house of the Lord laid in the month Ziph, and in the 11th year, in the month Bul, which is the 8th month, which was the house finished throughout all the parts thereof, according to all the fashion of it, so was he 7 years in building it. Now, it's a lengthy building project. I've been watching with incredible fascination as they're completing my new office complex over here at Zaxby's. The chicken place is going up on the corner. Huh? Yeah, that's what it is. I want to have office there, and you come over and see me, and we'll eat some chicken and drink sweet tea together. And so that's going up, and man, it's going to be ready here soon. They got the glass all in, I see, and so just a few months to put that together, and pretty soon they'll be getting the siding on. The things are going on inside. They'll finally pave the parking lot, and they'll stripe it, and get the landscaping done, and then sometime in May, we'll be able to go over. And so this thing took 7 years. 7 years to build. And it required, like every building project, more money than you thought. That's the way it always works, isn't it? It's more money than you thought it was going to be. And it took more effort. And there was this forced labor that was going on with this. But that wasn't the only thing that he was building. Look here in chapter 7, just the next verse down, chapter 7, verse number 1. It says, but Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished all his house. That was some kind of house, I bet. Look, 7 years to build the house of the Lord, 13 to build my house. So that's a lot of stuff being built. And like the house of the Lord, it probably cost more than he anticipated. Just so there was a taxation that was going on there that was heavy. Matter of fact, if you would go over to 1 Kings chapter 12. 1 Kings chapter 12. There's a group of people led by Jeroboam, and the kingdom hasn't really split yet, but this is at the beginning of it. And there's a contingent of people that come, and they begin to speak to Rehoboam, and they say in verse 4, 1 Kings 12, it says, thy father made our yoke grievous. What's that mean? He made our yoke grievous. What's that mean? Heavy, hard, difficult. Your dad made it hard on us, grievous. And he said, it says, and his heavy yoke, which he put upon us. Let me read the whole thing in. Thy father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore make thou the grievous service of thy father and his heavy yoke, which he put upon us, lighter, and we will serve thee. He said, the hard work and the heavy taxation, we don't have anything for ourselves. If you would make it lighter, we would follow you. And so that's part of the reason why there was a split. Another reason, if you would go back just a page to 1 Kings 11, I'm not going to read all of this, but just a reminder about it. It wasn't just the heavy taxation and the forced labor, but it was Solomon's idolatry and God's judgment of that. So in 1 Kings 11:1 it says, but King Solomon loved many strange women. Strange women is just different. Women that shouldn't have been his. He loved many strange women together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, and Hittites. All these nations, 700 it says in verse 3, 300 concubines. And it's very telling in verse number 3, it says, and his wives his wives turned away his heart. And here's a wise man doing the craziest things. It says that Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord in verse number 6. It says in verse number 7, he built a high place for one of the gods, Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and all these other gods that he got his life intertwined with. And God is going to take the kingdom from him because of his idolatry, because of the influence of these women. Look down in verse number 9. You see, sometimes we think this is going on. We think that God has turned a blind eye to certain things. Sometimes we think God's not doing anything about this. God must not care. But God is seeing it all. In verse number 9, God's answer to Solomon's wickedness, it says, and the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart was turned away from the Lord God of Israel, which had appeared unto him twice, and he had commanded him concerning this thing about these other gods. Look in verse 11, it says, for as much as this is done of thee, thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes which I commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee, and will give it to thy servant. This thought of rending it from Solomon's hands, it has a sense of violence to it, doesn't it? It's just a very aggressive act. I'm going to take it out of your hands. Go pull it away from him. He said, I'm judging you, and I'm going to give it to your servant. And the servant that he's going to give it to is a man by Jeroboam. Jeroboam's going to get the part of the kingdom, 10 of these. And then you have Jeroboam's rebellion. Look in chapter 11, verse number 29. I don't know if Jeroboam thought he'd ever be the king of Israel, but he meets a prophet along the way. Look at verse number 29. It says, it came to pass at that time when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem that the prophet Ahijah, the Shilonite, found him in the way, and he had clad himself with a new garment, and they two were alone in the field. And Ahijah caught the new garment that was on him, what he was wearing. It says he rent it in 12 pieces. He tears his clothes apart. It's like I went out and bought a new suit at Joseph A. Bank, and I tore that suit apart. And I say to this guy, Jeroboam, take 10 pieces of my suit. He takes the 10 pieces. He says, you're going to have 10 of the tribes that you're going to rule over. You're going to be king over. And we'll give these other parts, the other tribes, they're going to stay in the house of David. And so Solomon's heavy taxes, Solomon's idolatry, Jeroboam's rebellion. And so this split comes. Rehoboam doesn't help things. Look in chapter 12, Rehoboam's reigning, getting ready to lead Israel in chapter 12, verse 1. And this group comes to ask him about the taxes. In verse 5, he says, give me 3 days to think about it. And then look at verse number 6. It says, and King Rehoboam consulted with the old men. Now, what do you think is going on when you ask the old men? What are you doing when you ask the old men what they think? What are you trying to do there? Gain wisdom. They've been around the block. They've seen some things. They're steady. They're not new to this. And so he asks the old men, what should we do? And they tell him, you need to take a lighter hand. You need to make it easy on them. Matter of fact, it says in verse 7, it says, if thou wilt be a servant unto this people this day, and wilt serve them, and answer them, and speak good words to them, then will they be thy servants forever. He said, if you take a lighter touch, hey, they're going to walk with you forever, buddy. But that's not what he does. He forsakes, it says in verse 8, but he forsook the counsel of the old men which they'd given him, and consulted with the young men that were grown up with him, which stood before him. What kind of counsel is he going to get from the young men here? Not good, okay. Inexperienced. Sometimes a young person is led by emotion. They say, not only should you not lighten the load, not only should you let things maintain where they're at, They say, make the load even heavier. Make it even worse. They said, hey, your dad chastised them with whips. You chastise them with scorpions. And that's what he does. And it blows apart the kingdom. He doesn't ease the burden. He makes it worse. And so the kingdom falls apart. He doesn't listen. The people revolt. And so, matter of fact, when Rehoboam sends his tax collector, and I don't know that I got his, let me see if I get his name here. Verse number 18, it says, then King Rehoboam sends Adoram, that's the person over his tribute. How do you think he was received, Rehoboam's tax collector, to the northern 10 tribes? Do you know the story? Do you know what happens here? They stone him. He is not embraced. He is not received. He is not only just run out of town, he is stoned to death. And Rehoboam is on the run. And so it's really fallen apart. It really has divided. Rehoboam gathers a group of about 180,000 people, I think it is. 180,000 men. He's going to go against the northern kingdom. Hey, these are brothers. These are people that worship together. Isn't it a sad thing when God's people cannot get along and they fight? And so that's what's about to happen. And God stops that. He doesn't let that happen. He tells them not to go to war. And so now there is a northern kingdom, and now there is a southern kingdom. I want you to think about this. In our world today, you have a church that is, let's call it hope. The church is called hope. And something happens inside with the people, and the people start to fight, and a group of people go down the road that left hope, and they're going to open up another church because they hate the people up the road, and they hate them, and they're going to call it New Hope. You got hope, and then you got New Hope down the road. That's more true than not. And it's a sad thing. It's a sad thing. And so the world is watching Israel here, the northern kingdom called Israel, the southern kingdom called Judah, and people are scratching their head and said, aren't those all Jews? Aren't those all Hebrew people? Yeah, but they can't get along. They can't get along. And so there's some key differences here between the northern and the southern kingdom. Jeroboam's the king of the northern kingdom. Rehoboam's the king of the southern kingdom. Jeroboam has 10 tribes. Rehoboam has 2 tribes. The capital city that later down the road for the northern kingdom is Samaria. The capital of the southern city is Jerusalem. The religion of the northern kingdom becomes idol worship. Matter of fact, Jeroboam, he realizes that, look, here I've got all these people that I'm leading that are Jews, and they're supposed to go to Jerusalem every year. If they go to Jerusalem, their hearts are going to be tied to Jerusalem. He said, I'm going to lose them. So tell you what, I'm going to create a whole different religious system up here. I'm going to make 2 golden calves. I'm going to put one of them, I think he puts them in, one in Bethel and one in Dan. And he creates a new religious holiday, and they're worshiping there, and he's offering sacrifice, so they don't have to go to Jerusalem anymore. And so he separates not only physically from them, governmentally from them, but he separates them spiritually. They're in Jerusalem, they have temple worship, and out of about 18 or 20 kings in the northern kingdom, I think it's 19 kings, none of them are good. None of them are right. In the southern kingdom, there's about 18 kings, and there's about, out of the 18, there are about 8 that are good. 8. And oftentimes, you might have a good king and a bad king. His son would be a bad king, and the bad king, his son would follow, and he'd be a good king. It was very odd. Just very chaotic. The northern kingdom, at about 722 BC, they go into Assyrian captivity. They are conquered. The 10 northern kingdoms are led into captivity. About 140 years later, the southern kingdom is led into captivity, Babylon. And so there's a lot here for us to take in. And the main thing is this, is that idolatry will take us away from the Lord. And these decisions to be disobedient to God, they're not done in a vacuum. There are consequences to our sin. There are consequences to our disobedience to God. And we think sometimes we got away with it. Nobody knew about it. I did it in quiet. But oftentimes that disobedience in one instance, one thing, it ripples out. And it says in Numbers, I think it is about chapter 22, be sure your sin will find you out. Things will be uncovered. It will be seen. It will be manifested. The things that are done in secret are broadcast in the daylight. And all the world will shake their head and say, they didn't have much faith. They didn't have much true religion. They really didn't follow God. And so we become an embarrassment to ourselves and our family and our nation, but we can become an embarrassment even to our God. And so every time a Christian falls on their face, we have the opportunity for forgiveness, obviously, but it's a point where the world can point at it and say, man, not so good, not so good. So we want to avoid that if we can. And if you do fall, get up. Get up. With God's help, get up and go again and try to straighten the record out. So anyway, we're looking at this. We're probably going to somehow, I'm not sure quite how to do it, but I kind of want to look at the northern kings and then the southern kings, do all that in like one big shot, separate it one night for the northern kingdom, one night for the southern, kind of see the really good, the really bad. Ahab was a northern guy. There are certain prophets that worked within the northern kingdom, some within the southern kingdom. So anyway, I don't want to get too far ahead of where we're at. So anyway, there's a lot of kings, right? A lot of kings. We always think about Saul and David and Solomon, but there's a whole bunch more. So anyway, let's pray, and we'll be dismissed. Craig, do you mind praying for us tonight?